It's the most wonderful time of the year, unless you happen to be one of the unfortunate few who end up lost in the midst of a Christmas night disaster. In tonight's terrifying video, we dive into 5 chilling, true stories of lost travelers who had encounters that will make you think twice before venturing out during the holiday season. From eerie experiences at rest stops to ghostly sightings on snowy roads, these tales are the stuff of nightmares. Grab a blanket, turn off the lights, and prepare for a journey into the unknown. You won't want to miss these spine-tingling true horror stories. This story is about the rest stop of no return. It was Christmas Eve, and Amanda and Lucas were driving home after a holiday visit with family. The roads were slick with snow, and a heavy storm had rolled in faster than expected, reducing visibility to almost nothing. Tired and anxious about the conditions, Lucas suggested pulling into a small rest stop they noticed a few miles back to wait for the storm to pass. The parking lot was completely empty, and the building looked desolate, with only a few flickering lights inside. They parked near the front and cautiously stepped out of their car, the cold air biting at their faces. Amanda went into the small lobby while Lucas headed for the restroom. The building smelled faintly of stale coffee and damp concrete, and the buzzing of the overhead lights made the place feel even more unsettling. It was eerily quiet, no one else was there. Amanda stood by the vending machines, staring out the large window as the snowstorm raged on. The winds howled, but the parking lot outside remained deserted. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps echoing from the back hallway. She turned, expecting to see Lucas, but the hallway was dark, and there was no sign of him. The footsteps continued, slower this time, as though someone was approaching her from behind. A chill ran down her spine as she felt the weight of another presence in the room. She turned quickly, but no one was there. The footsteps stopped suddenly, and she felt a strange pressure in the air, like someone was standing just out of sight, watching her. A cold draft swept through the room, and the flickering lights above her flickered more erratically. Then, a shadow appeared in the corner of her eye, just outside the window. She stepped closer, her breath fogging up the glass. She could see a figure standing in the snowstorm, facing her directly. The figure didn't move, and as she tried to get a better look, the shadow faded into the darkness. Amanda's heart pounded as she turned to look back at the hallway. Lucas was standing there now, looking confused. "Everything okay?" he asked. This story is about the haunted highway. It was Christmas night when Jennifer and her husband Daniel found themselves driving along a desolate stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere. They were on their way to a remote cabin, a holiday getaway they had been looking forward to for months. But as they drove deeper into the woods, the air grew thick with fog, and the headlights barely cut through the murk. The only sounds were the wind rustling through the trees and the faint hum of their car. Jennifer felt an uneasy feeling settle over her as she glanced at Daniel. "Do you think we should pull over?" she asked, her voice tense. The snow was coming down hard, and visibility was near zero. "No, we'll be fine," Daniel reassured her, his hands tightly gripping the steering wheel. As they pressed on, a strange shadow moved across the road ahead, just at the edge of their headlights. Jennifer gasped, her heart skipping a beat. "Did you see that?" she whispered, but Daniel shook his head. The fog seemed to thicken even more, and suddenly, a figure appeared out of nowhere in the middle of the road. It was a woman, dressed in a long, dark coat, standing motionless and staring directly at their car. Daniel slammed on the brakes, but by the time they came to a stop, the woman had vanished, as if she had never been there at all. They waited in stunned silence for several moments before Daniel reluctantly started driving again. But as they continued down the road, the feeling of being watched never left them. The strange sensation lingered, and every curve of the road seemed to bring them closer to something dark and unfathomable. The trees on either side of the highway seemed to close in, their twisted branches like clawed hands reaching out toward them. The wind picked up, howling through the gaps in the trees, making the air feel unnaturally cold. Suddenly, the car's radio flickered on, broadcasting static before a faint whisper came through the speakers. "Turn back, you're not welcome here." The words were barely audible, but the chill they sent through Jennifer and Daniel was unmistakable. Daniel's grip tightened on the wheel, his knuckles white as he stared ahead, trying to focus on the road. But every now and then, Jennifer swore she saw flashes of movement in the fog, figures lurking just out of sight, watching them from the trees. As they arrived at the cabin and parked, Jennifer glanced over her shoulder and caught a glimpse of a figure standing at the edge of the woods. Her stomach turned, and she knew, deep down, that they weren't alone. The figure was barely visible through the trees, its form tall and unnaturally still. The figure's eyes gleamed in the dim light, like two spots of light piercing through the fog. She quickly turned away, trying to dismiss the thought, but the feeling of dread gnawed at her. They hurried inside the cabin, the door slamming shut behind them. But as the night wore on, neither of them could shake the feeling that they were being watched, that something, or someone, was waiting just outside. Every creak of the wood, every gust of wind, seemed to whisper a warning. Jennifer stayed close to Daniel, but deep inside, she felt a growing certainty: whatever had followed them to the cabin was not going to let them leave easily. This story is about the Christmas Eve call. On Christmas Eve, Mike and his family were headed to visit his in-laws for the holiday. They decided to take a scenic route through a remote area, hoping to enjoy the beauty of the snow-covered trees and hills. But as the evening wore on, the roads began to become increasingly treacherous. Snow had begun to fall heavier, and the cold seemed to seep into their bones. At one point, Mike's car sputtered and came to an unexpected stop. The engine wouldn't turn over, and the lights flickered out. Stranded on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere, Mike called roadside assistance, but the call dropped before they could confirm any details. The only option left was to wait for help to arrive. As the family sat in the car, the temperature continued to plummet. Mike glanced out the window and saw a figure walking along the road. At first, he thought it was a hitchhiker or a fellow traveler, but as the figure approached, it became clear that something was wrong. The person was wearing an old-fashioned suit, their face obscured by a large scarf. Mike rolled down the window slightly, trying to communicate with the stranger, but the person didn't respond. Instead, they simply stood there, staring at Mike with an unnerving, unblinking gaze. Before Mike could react, the figure turned and walked back into the snow, disappearing into the darkness. Mike watched, frozen, as the figure faded into the storm. His heart pounded in his chest. What kind of person would be walking out here in the middle of a snowstorm, in such an old-fashioned outfit? As he sat there, unease settling deep in his stomach, a cold shiver crawled down his spine. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was a missed call from an unknown number. He quickly redialed the number, but the line was filled with static, only a few garbled words piercing through. "Don't trust him. Not him." The call abruptly ended. Mike sat back in his seat, staring at the phone in disbelief, the eerie feeling growing stronger. Who had called him? And who had that figure been? The questions lingered in the air like the snowstorm swirling outside, leaving Mike with an unsettling feeling that the strange encounter was far from over. This story is about the stranger in the woods. Samantha had always wanted to spend Christmas in the woods, surrounded by the quiet of nature. She and her boyfriend, Derek, decided to take a trip to a cabin deep in the forest for the holiday. The journey there was long and winding, but as night fell, they finally reached the cabin, nestled between snow-covered pines. But as soon as they entered, something felt off. The air inside was cold, and there was an unsettling silence. They set up their things, hoping the strange atmosphere would pass, but it only grew more intense as the night went on. Around midnight, the doorbell rang. Samantha and Derek exchanged a confused look. Who could be visiting them at this hour in the middle of nowhere? They cautiously opened the door, but there was no one there. Instead, they found a small gift box on the doorstep. Inside was a small, hand-carved wooden figure of a man. But what caught their attention were the strange symbols etched into the wood, symbols they had never seen before. As they examined it, Derek noticed a figure standing far in the distance near the tree line. The figure didn't move, just stood there, watching them. Samantha felt her heart race, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. "Who could that be?" she whispered. Derek squinted into the darkness but saw nothing more than the vague silhouette of a person. The cold air seemed to press in around them, and the distant figure still lingered, motionless, as if it were waiting for something. They quickly closed the door, but the feeling of being watched never faded. The rest of the night passed in tense silence, with every creak of the floorboards or gust of wind sending them into anxious alertness. When morning finally came, they rushed to leave the cabin, but as they loaded their things into the car, they noticed something even stranger, footprints leading up to the cabin door, but none leading away. This story is about the lost Christmas traveler. It was Christmas Eve, and Jason was driving home after a long day of work. He had been traveling for hours, and as the night wore on, he found himself on a deserted country road. The landscape around him was a blur of white, and the only thing he could see clearly were the headlights illuminating the snow. Out of nowhere, he noticed a figure standing at the side of the road. It was a man, dressed in a heavy coat, looking as though he was stranded. Jason pulled over, worried the man might be in trouble. The man asked for a ride, claiming that he was lost and needed help. Despite the warning bells ringing in his head, Jason agreed, figuring he was just being overly cautious. But as the man climbed into the car, Jason noticed something unsettling. The man didn't speak a word during the entire ride, staring out the window the whole time. When they finally reached a gas station, Jason glanced over to offer help, but the man was gone. In his place was a small note, written in an old-fashioned script, "Thank you for helping me find my way home." Confused, Jason sat there for a moment, staring at the note. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, especially when he noticed that the gas station was completely empty, with no sign of life anywhere around. He had arrived at the station hours later than expected, as if time itself had shifted while he was on the road. His breath caught in his throat as he remembered the odd, almost unnatural silence of the night. Was it just his imagination? Or had he unknowingly helped someone who shouldn't have been there? Looking down at the note again, Jason felt an eerie shiver crawl up his spine. He had helped someone, yes, but what if that person was never really lost, and he had been led into something much darker than he could ever understand? And there you have it, 5 chilling true horror stories of lost travelers on Christmas night. Whether it's haunted rest stops, eerie figures in the woods, or strange encounters on snowy roads, these terrifying tales remind us that sometimes the holidays bring more than just festive cheer. If you enjoyed these terrifying tales, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another creepy story. And remember, keep your doors locked tight, because you never know who might be out there on a cold, lonely Christmas night. Stay safe, and happy holidays, if you can.